Captain David Monroe hadn't expected anything out of the ordinary when he was briefed on the mission that morning. His team was tasked with extracting a 5-man recon unit from a ridge outside Kandahar. The location had been flagged as low activity, which usually meant a smooth pickup, but smooth didn't mean safe not out here. As the Black Hawk hovered in the choking dust, the recon unit sprinted toward the bird, their gear clanging and their eyes darting to every shadow. In moments, they were on board, breathing hard, dirty, tired. That should have been it. Lift off, fly back to base, debrief. But then the dog changed everything. Rex had stood at the edge of the ramp, like a statue, solid, unmoving. The crew had tried calling him, coaxing him, even nudging him forward, but he wouldn't take another step. His body was tense. His growl, low and warning, never wavered. He wasn't scared. He was alert, like he was protecting everyone from something invisible. "What's he doing?" Sergeant Miller, one of the recon soldiers, asked. "Why is he blocking the ramp?" Jennings, Rex's handler, crouched beside him. "He's never done this before. Something's wrong." David, now standing beside the cockpit, could feel the pressure in his chest. His instinct screamed to get airborne. Every second on the ground increased the risk of a sniper shot, a mortar, or worse. But the dog's refusal felt intentional. Not hesitation, not panic. A decision. Then came the sound, a faint click, too subtle for most to hear, but not for Rex. His ears twitched. His head snapped toward the base of the ramp. Jennings followed the line of his gaze. "Sir, I think there's something." Before he could finish, Jennings dove forward. Using his flashlight, he reached under the metal hinge. That's when everyone heard it. A rapid, high-pitched beep. Time froze. "Bomb!" Jennings shouted, yanking his hand back. Chaos erupted. Soldiers scrambled back inside. The crew chief slammed the emergency brake on the ramp. Rex stayed frozen in place, as if standing guard. David's breath caught. The helicopter could have lifted with the ramp folding right into the explosive. It would have detonated mid-air, ripping through the fuel lines, killing everyone instantly. It was rigged perfectly to look like part of the equipment, and the only one who noticed it was Rex. Engineers rushed in from a nearby transport to carefully dismantle the device. It had been wired with military precision, clearly planted to take out a crew on extraction. That's when Jennings turned to David and said something he'd never forget. "He's not just a dog, he's a soldier. He's seen this before." David crouched next to Rex, his heart pounding. "Did you just save my whole crew?" he whispered. Rex didn't bark, didn't move. He just stared at David, breathing slow and steady, as if answering silently. David reached out, gently placing a hand on the dog's thick fur. He wasn't a fan of working with canine South, too unpredictable, he always thought. But now, he was shaken, not just by what almost happened, but by the realization that he nearly ignored a warning that came without words. Back at base, word spread quickly. Soldiers clapped Jennings on the back. Some bent to pat Rex and offer him water. But the dog didn't care for praise. He sat by the hangar, gaze fixed on the ramp as the bomb squad finished clearing the last of the device. David stood watching him from a distance. It struck him then. How many times had he dismissed a gut feeling, a hesitation, a signal that something was off? He realized that Rex wasn't just trained. He had instincts humans didn't, and more importantly, he trusted them. David made a mental note that day. Never ignore a dog that won't move, especially one like Rex. And as the sun dipped behind the airfield and the heat finally began to fade, David couldn't help but wonder. The base was quiet that evening, but the tension lingered like desert dust in the air. Captain David Monroe sat alone in the dim corner of the mess hall, a half-empty coffee mug cooling in front of him. He hadn't touched it in 20 minutes. Across the room, Jennings fed Rex scraps of beef from a tray. The dog, calm and composed, now ate without urgency, his eyes scanning the room between bites. Even at rest, Rex never seemed fully at ease. There was a constant alertness to him, a low buzz of awareness that never faded. David kept replaying the moment in his head, the locked gaze, the growl, the refusal to move. A dog had read a threat before 6 trained men and 2 advanced sensors had caught it. That kind of awareness wasn't just training, that was instinct sharpened by trauma. He didn't know much about Rex's background yet, but he knew what he'd seen today was no accident. Later that night, David knocked on the kennel office door where Jennings was finishing Rex's end-of-day log. "Mind if I ask you something?" David asked. Jennings nodded. Yeah, come in. David leaned against the desk. What's his story? That wasn't just training back there. He knew something we didn't. Jennings hesitated, then exhaled. You're right. Rex isn't just any K9. He was deployed twice before this. Afghanistan, Syria. His first handler sergeant, Leone, was killed during a medevac ambush. Rex was with him. They think he detected something was wrong that day too, but they didn't listen. David stared, silent. Since then, Jennings continued, he's different, more cautious, more insistent when something feels off. I was assigned to him last year. He saved 3 lives just by refusing to move. You were almost number 4. David swallowed hard. He hadn't expected that answer to hit him so deep. What happened to him after his first handler died? He asked. They tried retiring him, Jennings said. He refused to adjust. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. He kept going to the tarmac every morning like he was waiting to be called again. Eventually, they brought him back into service. He needs the job. But more than that, he doesn't want to let it happen again. That line sat heavy in David's chest. He doesn't want to let it happen again. It sounded like something a human would carry: grief, guilt, purpose. But in Rex's case, it was all mixed into something far deeper than orders or obedience. The next morning, they were briefed again. Another recon team had requested urgent extraction this time, closer to enemy zones. Intel had flagged the route as risky. Insurgents were reportedly using decoys and tripwire traps disguised as parts of US vehicles. David stood in the hangar, eyes flicking to the Black Hawk being prepped. Every detail seemed more important now. Every wire, every panel, nothing could be overlooked. Then he saw Rex being loaded into the chopper without hesitation, calm and composed. Jennings followed right behind. Before boarding, David crouched beside the dog. You were right yesterday, he said quietly. We won't ignore you again. Rex tilted his head slightly, then nudged David's hand once before turning to face the open ramp. It felt less like a response and more like acknowledgement. The mission began smoothly. Midday sun scorched the desert below, and the team stayed at high altitude before descending into a shallow valley near the extraction zone. The recon unit was pinned down by sniper fire near binovisual on the threat. Time was limited. As the chopper hovered lower, Rex stood at the ready, eyes sharp. But this time, something was different. He wasn't tense. He wasn't growling. Instead, his ears twitched twice, then his head snapped to the left side of the ramp. David noticed. What's he doing? Jennings leaned down. He's tracking something, but not inside. Then, with no warning, Rex growled, not at the ramp this time but out the side of the aircraft, toward a rocky ridge. Suddenly, 2 shots rang out. Sharp, whistling cracks that missed the chopper by inches. The sniper had fired, but Rex had sensed it before a single bullet flew. David pulled the bird up hard and banked left. Gunfire answered from below. The crew opened suppressive fire. The recon unit made their break and dashed toward the chopper. Chaos exploded all around them, but Rex didn't flinch. He was already moving to the edge of the ramp, ready again. Gunfire crackled through the valley like dry twigs snapping in a fire. Captain David Monroe kept his grip tight on the stick as the Black Hawk dipped and dodged through uneven gusts of wind. The extraction point, once marked as low threat, had turned into a hostile zone in seconds. 3 soldiers from the recon unit had already made it to the helicopter, diving onto the ramp as bullets pinged off the outer frame. The remaining 2 were pinned behind an outcrop of rock about 40 yards away, signaling frantically. Suppressive fire. Now. David barked into his comms. His crew opened up, bullets pouring toward the ridge. Rex stood just inside the helicopter, tense and ready, his paws shifting as he watched the battlefield with laser focus. Jennings gripped his vest but didn't try to hold him back. He knew better by now. David saw one of the pinned soldiers make a break for it, zigzagging through the sand while ducking low. He nearly stumbled before lunging up the ramp, gasping, his helmet half hanging off. One left. Where's Harper? A recon soldier shouted, still behind the rocks. Someone else answered. Then Rex moved. Without a sound or command, he bolted out the ramp and into the open. Rex, wait, Jennings shouted, but it was too late. The helicopter crew looked on in disbelief as the dog darted into enemy fire. He stayed low, fast, weaving like a shadow across the sand. It wasn't recklessness, it was purpose. David felt his chest tighten. I'm holding position, he said into the headset. No one fires near the ridge unless I say, Rex is out, there. Seconds stretched like rope pulled too tight. Then, from the dust, two figures emerged, Harper, limping and bleeding from a graze to his leg, and Rex, at his side, growling and barking with intensity. The dog was half herding, half dragging Harper forward. The crew chief ran down the ramp and pulled Harper inside. Rex bounded in after him, immediately turning to face the edge of the ramp. He stood there, body blocking the exit again like earlier, but this time, his focus was different. Jennings crouched beside him, panting. What's he doing now? David glanced over his shoulder. Rex hadn't moved forward into the chopper's cabin. He stood just inches from where the ramp would normally retract, his flat tail stiff, and then the growl came again. Not loud, not fearful, but sharp. Warning. David's blood ran cold. You've got to be kidding me, he whispered. He jumped from the cockpit and rushed back to the ramp, crouching beside the same hydraulic hinge from the day before. Not again, but this time what he found wasn't a bomb. It was a small, almost unnoticeable transmitter camouflaged to look like part of the metal assembly, barely the size of a thumb drive. Jennings blinked. That's not a trigger. No, David said, voice tight. That's a tracker. Suddenly everything clicked. The sniper fire, the failed ambush, the rapid reaction from enemy fighters. They hadn't been guessing where the Black Hawk could be. They'd known. They're tracking us, David said. They wanted us to escape with that device still attached. Jennings yanked it out with a gloved hand and smashed it under his boot. Rex didn't flinch. He just stood there, now satisfied, and finally backed away from the ramp. This wasn't coincidence, not a lucky moment of intuition. This was deliberate detection. Again. As the ramp closed and the Black Hawk lifted from the hot sand, David returned to the cockpit, mind reeling. The dog had done it again. Once is luck, twice. That's instinct, that's training, that's a soldier. Back at base, medics rushed Harper to the infirmary. The rest of the team debriefed, but no one could stop talking about Rex. Harper, barely able to sit upright, grinned through bloodied lips. That dog came for me like he knew I wasn't making it without him. I owe him everything. David stood nearby, watching Rex sip from a bowl of water, tail wagging lightly now that the job was done. He didn't want recognition. He didn't need a medal. He just wanted to do his job, and he'd done it better than most humans ever could. David knew then that Rex wasn't just a partner. He was something far more valuable, a quiet protector, a guardian without words, and, above all, someone who never ignored his instincts. 2 days after the sniper ambush, base operations were under high alert. The discovery of the hidden tracker on the Black Hawk had changed everything. Intelligence teams scrambled to analyze the device's circuitry. It wasn't just a beacon, it had transmitted flight paths, coordinates, and timestamps back to an unknown network. Captain David Monroe hadn't slept much since. The thought kept playing in his mind. What if Rex hadn't caught it? What if they had flown that bird out again and led enemies straight to their next landing zone? There was no telling how many lives the dog had saved by just refusing to step forward. In a briefing room the next morning, David sat beside Jennings while a tech officer ran through a slideshow of similar devices found in other NATO helicopters over the past 3 months. No one had noticed them before because they were designed to blend in and piggyback silently on electrical systems. Most disturbing of all, the base commander believed the trackers were being planted during high-risk extractions, meaning someone had to get dangerously close during the loading chaos. The likelihood, highly trained infiltrators disguised as civilians, or even in stolen coalition gear. The mission that day had been an ambush waiting to happen, and it almost worked. After the meeting, Jennings and David walked together across the field toward the kennel building, where Rex was lying under the shade of a camo net. His head lifted the moment they approached. His tail thumped twice low and steady. David crouched beside him and scratched behind his ears. "You're saving more lives than most men out here," he murmured, "and we've been treating you like you were just a tool." Jennings leaned against the fencing, arms crossed. "He knows what he's doing, but I won't lie, he's carrying something heavy. He doesn't show it much, but it's there." David glanced up, still about his first handler. Jennings nodded. Sergeant Leone was his world. They trained together from the beginning. That medevac ambush wrecked him. Not just the loss, but the guilt. He tried to warn them, refused to board then, but they dragged him in. Ramp closed. 30 seconds later, they were hit by an IED in midair. David exhaled slowly. He was the only survivor. Those words settled hard between them. Every time we board a chopper now, Jennings added, he's reliving it. You can see it, but he still does the job. Every single time. David looked at Rexcom, quiet, staring back with those deep brown eyes that seemed to hold a language of their own. Later that afternoon, an emergency request came in. A humanitarian convoy delivering medical supplies had gone dark in a valley known for insurgent traps. 2 vehicles were missing. Drone footage showed what looked like a wrecked truck and heat signatures nearby. David was assigned the mission: low-altitude recon, potential evacuation. He checked the crew, made sure the bird was prepped, and then looked for Rex. The dog was already sitting beside the helicopter, as if he knew. The flight there was tense but quiet. As they neared the convoy site, smoke coiled from behind a ridge, and 2 blackened trucks lay in a ditch. A dozen people huddled behind sandbags, some with wounds, others holding up makeshift flags. The chopper hovered low as David scanned for threats. Rex stood at the open ramp again, ears high, body still. The crew prepared to deploy. Jennings moved to clip Rex's harness, but Rex didn't move forward. Again, his tail stiffened. His head snapped to the right, toward a pile of broken crates near the convoy. "Dad," then he growled. David's stomach dropped. "I'm not ignoring it," he said instantly. He signaled the crew to hold position. Jennings dropped to one knee and raised binoculars, focusing where Rex had locked eyes. There, barely visible, was a man in tattered robes crouched behind a crate. He wore no uniform, held no rifle, but his hand was pressed to something beside him, something with wires. David shouted into comms, "Possible triggerman, 10 meters east of target convoy. Do not deploy." Gunfire suddenly erupted. The man darted forward, clutching a device just as an army sniper, hidden in Overwatch, took the shot. He dropped instantly. The crew rushed in. The explosives were rigged to the back of one of the trucks. A dead man's switch had been built into the frame, waiting for the helicopter to land. Rex had saved them again. David sat in the cockpit later, gripping the controls as the adrenaline faded. "He doesn't hesitate," he said to Jennings. "Not even when he's scared." "No," Jennings replied, "because he remembers what happens when people don't listen to him." David turned to watch Rex, who now rested peacefully by the gear bags, his job done again. But deep in those quiet eyes, David could still see it. Not just instinct, not just training, but a memory, one that would never let him rest completely. That night, long after the sun had disappeared behind the mountains and the base had settled into its usual nighttime rhythm, Captain David Monroe sat outside the barracks with a notebook on his lap. He hadn't written in it for months. It wasn't for reports or logs, it was personal. Thoughts, questions, regrets. And tonight, all of them revolved around Rex. The mission earlier had shaken David, not because of the enemy or the bombs bit, because he was beginning to realize that this dog was carrying something far heavier than any of them. Instinct was one thing, but what Rex had done multiple times now went beyond that. David flipped through his notebook, but his mind wasn't focused. Instead, it wandered to a story Jennings had told him earlier in the day, when they sat alone, on the edge of the landing strip, watching Rex sniff the gear crates. He was barely 2 when he was assigned to Sergeant Leone, Jennings had said, his voice quiet. They trained together for almost a year. "You know how it is with canine handlers. They're bonded tighter than most humans ever get. They don't just work together. They sleep, eat, deploy, breathe, in the same rhythm." And for Rex, Leone was everything. David listened without interrupting. They deployed twice to Syria, then Afghanistan, mostly convoys and clearance operations. But the day everything changed, Jennings paused, running a hand through his hair. It was an emergency evac mission. A patrol had been ambushed, and they needed a bird to get in fast. The team was pinned, and the only way out was through hot airspace. Jennings looked out at the tarmac. Rex and Leone were loaded onto the chopper. Rex hesitated at the ramp. "Same way you saw," he growled, refused to move. Everyone thought he was just scared of the gunfire, but Leone knew better. He tried to delay takeoff, begged the pilot to give it a second, but the clock was ticking. David remembered the urgency he'd felt on his own missions, how seconds felt like hours, how hesitation could get people killed or save them. They forced Rex in. Jennings continued, strapped him to the cargo net and lifted off. 20 seconds into flight, boom, the rear of the chopper exploded. An IED had been planted on the landing gear, took out the entire back half. David swallowed hard. Leone was in the blast radius. He didn't make it. Neither did the crew. Rex was thrown from the bird when it broke apart mid-air. Somehow, he survived the fall. They found him 2 miles from the crash site, injured, concussed, and refusing to let medics approach without smelling their uniforms first. Jennings rubbed his chin. He was hospitalized for weeks. They tried to retire him, said he was too traumatized. But every morning, he'd go to the fence near the landing pads and sit there, waiting, like he was hoping Leone would come back. David blinked hard. That's when Command realized Rex wasn't done. He didn't want retirement. He wanted redemption. Now, hours later, sitting under the stars, David finally understood something deeper. Rex wasn't just doing his job out of habit. He wasn't sniffing out threats because of reward systems or command cues. He was reliving something, trying, in his own way, to prevent history from repeating. The dog was driven by a memory, not just of loss, but of failure. And that realization hit David in a way he hadn't expected, because he knew that feeling too. He reached for his water bottle and took a sip, then heard soft steps beside him. He looked over Rex.com, silent, eyes glimmering in the moonlight. David smiled faintly. Can't sleep either, huh? Rex sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. David didn't say anything for a while, just listened to the silence. Then, finally, he said, I don't know what you saw that day, but I believe you've been trying to make it right ever since. Rex didn't move, didn't need to, because in that moment, David understood they were alike. 2 soldiers haunted by things they couldn't change, bound by silence, and trying one mission at a time to make sure no one else had to pay the price of what they'd already lost. The next mission came with almost no warning. Just after sunrise, alarms blared through the base. A convoy had been hit on a narrow mountain road northwest of Gosney for injured, one presumed critical. The remaining personnel were holed up behind a flipped transport truck, using its body as a shield while they waited for air rescue. It wasn't a recon. It wasn't a supply run. It was a full-blown emergency evacuation under fire. Captain David Monroe was on alert within 5 minutes. As soon as the order came in, he was on the move. He didn't need a second briefing. He didn't need breakfast. He just needed his bird, his crew, and Rex. Rex was already by the helicopter. Jennings stood beside him, tightening the straps of his vest, checking his paws for cuts, his gait's a little off from yesterday's sprint. Jennings reported, but he's not limping. He's good to go. David crouched, placing a hand gently on the dog's shoulder. You're sure you've got another miracle in you? He whispered. Rex blinked slowly, then stood and walked up the ramp without hesitation. This time, he didn't pause. The urgency in the air was thick. David could feel it before they even left the tarmac. The last message from the convoy commander had ended abruptly. There was a real possibility the enemy had the site surrounded. As the chopper cut across the terrain, wind and dust whipped violently through the open doors. The crew readied stretchers and medkits. Jennings clipped Rex, harnessed to his vest, but left the leash loose. He trusted the dog to move when it was time. When they arrived, it was chaos. Black smoke rose from the side of the road. The transport truck had tipped over into a ditch. A Humvee was burning nearby. The soldiers were crouched behind what was left of the vehicle, bloodied, weapons shaking, waiting for cover fire. David lowered the bird fast. Go. The crew chief and 2 medics leaped out first. Jennings and Rex followed, taking the far flank. Rex's body moved low and quick, his ears twitching with every shot fired in the distance. As they reached the wounded, Rex suddenly stopped. Again he froze, his nose pointed toward a dirt mound behind the truck. Jennings saw it too. David, hold the ramp. He yelled into comms. Rex has a fix on something near the back, possible IED, or secondary ambush. David hovered, heart thudding. The medics were already lifting 2 injured soldiers onto stretchers. Then, from behind the mound, movement. 2 figures in mismatched uniforms emerged, rifles raised. The ambush had already begun. But before anyone could react, Rex lunged. He broke free from Jennings and charged the mound with startling speed. One of the enemy fighters turned and fired, missed by inches before Rex slammed into him, sending both into the dirt. The second man turned to shoot Rex point blank, but Jennings was faster. A single, clean shot dropped him instantly. Gunfire erupted as backup units on the ridge opened up, covering the extraction. Within seconds, the ambush was neutralized, but the cost was still unknown. Jennings sprinted to Rex. The dog lay beside the downed enemy, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling too fast. Rex blood-stained the sand. David couldn't leave the controls but strained to look out. Report. Jennings pressed both hands to Rex's side. He's hit. Took a round to the flank, just missed his vest. The medics arrived in seconds, lifting Rex onto a stretcher normally meant for humans. He's not going down today, Jennings said through gritted teeth. Not after that. They loaded Rex into the chopper, along with the wounded soldiers. Jennings sat beside him, one hand keeping pressure on the wound, the other stroking the dog's head. David lifted off with urgency, heading back to base at full throttle. Inside the cabin, everything was chaos: blood, bandages, moans of pain. But Rex didn't whimper. He didn't cry. He just locked eyes with David through the cockpit doorway, and in that look, David saw something that made his throat tighten. Not fear, not pain, but apology. As if Rex was sorry he couldn't do more, as if even wounded he still felt it wasn't enough. David turned away quickly, blinking back the burn in his eyes. "No," he whispered. "You did everything, Rex, everything." The helicopter touched down in a controlled frenzy. Medics rushed to the ramp, yelling commands, holding stretchers, trying to sort the chaos as quickly as possible. Blood streaked across the floor. The injured soldiers were whisked away, one by one, but all David saw was the stretcher carrying Rex. The German shepherd lay still, his flank bandaged, soaked through with dark red. His breathing was shallow but steady. His ears twitched as voices surrounded him, but he didn't lift his head. He wasn't unconscious, but he was weak. Jennings refused to leave his side. "I'm going with him," he said to the medic team leader. "You're not hurt." "I don't care. I ride with him." The medic nodded once. No one argued. Everyone knew this wasn't just a dog. This was someone's partner, a soldier, a warrior. David stood by the helicopter, watching the stretcher roll away. Dust blew across the landing pad, clinging to his boots, but he didn't move, not yet. For hours, David stayed near the field hospital. Updates trickled in slowly. The other wounded was stable. One would need a medical flight to Germany. Another had a fractured spine but had survived, still breathing. And Rex, the vets said the bullet missed his vitals by millimeters. The bleeding had been controlled. He would live, but only if he rested. No more field work, no missions, no helicopters. His body had done enough. Jennings sat beside Rex's cot that night, legs crossed, head leaning on the wall behind him. He hadn't spoken much. He just kept one hand resting on Rex's paw. David came by just before midnight. Jennings looked up. "He's sleeping, but when he's awake he keeps trying to stand." David smiled faintly. "Of course he does. He doesn't get it," Jennings whispered. "He doesn't know he's done enough." David crouched beside the cot, looking at the dog who had changed the way he saw everything. It felt wrong to see him so still, so tired, but maybe he had earned it. "You know," David said, eyes fixed on Rex, "there are soldiers with medals who haven't done half of what he's done." Jennings nodded. "He's not going to want the recognition. That's not who he is, but maybe he needs it anyway," David said. "Not for him, for everyone else. They need to see what it means to follow instinct, to trust something without needing proof." Over the next 2 days, word spread. Photos of Rex on the stretcher circulated around the base. Messages came in from other units, some who had worked with him before, others who had heard the stories. Someone posted a picture of him standing on the helicopter ramp, eyes locked on danger, body tense like a statue. They called him the Guardian, the quiet hero who didn't move unless it mattered. On the third day, the base commander held a ceremony. It wasn't large, just the medical unit, a few pilots, some ground crew, and Jennings, who wheeled Rex in on a cart lined with a folded flag. David stood at the front, reading a citation. "This soldier," he said, voice steady, "has saved more lives than most of us will ever know. He's identified threats no machine could see. He's held his ground in gunfire, and when every instinct told him to protect, he obeyed. Not because he was trained to, but because he believed he had to." Jennings reached down and clipped a small silver medal to Rex's vest. It was custom-made, engraved with the words, "For valor beyond words." Rex didn't bark. He didn't move much, but his tail thumped once against the cart. Later that evening, David sat outside the hangar with a quiet cup of coffee, watching the sun dip behind the desert hills. Jennings walked up with Rex, who now limped slightly but was up and moving, insisted, Jennings said with a soft smile. He wanted to come here. David looked at the dog, who was staring at the ramp of the helicopter, just like he always did, watching, waiting. "You're not done, are you?" David murmured. Rex stepped forward and gently lay beside the ramp, resting his head on the metal edge, still guarding it, even now, still protecting people from something only he seemed to sense. And in that moment, David knew one thing for certain: whether or not Rex ever flew again, whether he ever stepped onto another battlefield, he had already done enough. More than enough. 6 weeks had passed since Rex's injury. The base had changed in small, subtle ways: extra security checks at the ramps, new thermal sensors installed on helicopters, and a quiet but noticeable shift in how the soldiers treated their canine units. But the biggest change of all, Rex wasn't being treated like a dog anymore. He was being honored like a veteran. Rex was officially retired from active combat duty after his wound failed to heal fully for operational deployment. The decision came from high command, and though everyone knew it was the right call, the announcement landed like a lump in the chest of those who had flown with him. Jennings didn't take it well at first. He had been Rex's handler, teammate, and closest friend. The idea of watching his partner be sidelined felt like an undeserved silence after years of loyalty. But Rex wasn't broken. He was ready for a different kind of mission. That idea started with David. They were standing by the hangar one morning, watching Rex, now healed enough to walk without a limb, resting in the sun. "I've been thinking," David said slowly. "Rex might be done with the front lines, but that doesn't mean he's done serving." Jennings turned. "What are you getting at?" "Back home. My sister works with veterans, guys who can't sleep, who flinch at fireworks, who don't speak to anyone, even years after returning. But one of them, a guy who lost his whole unit, started opening up after a therapy dog was brought in." Jennings raised an eyebrow. "You think Rex could be one of those dogs?" "I don't think. I know." That same afternoon, Jennings called in a favor. Within a week, paperwork was moving, and before the month was out, Rex was officially transferred into a special veterans therapy role reserved only for the most stable and emotionally attuned dogs. The kind that didn't just sense danger, the kind that sensed pain. Rex was flown stateside under medical escort. His crate was marked with a military flag and a handwritten note taped to the door that simply read, "He saved us more times than we can count. Take care of him." 3 months later, David got a letter. It came from a retired Marine named Troy Hernandez, who had served 2 tours and barely spoken in therapy since. His PTSD had been too deep, too stubborn. But then they introduced him to a new assistant. "Didn't expect anything," Troy had written. "Just another dog with soft ears and tired eyes." But he walked into the room and didn't come to me right away. He went to the window, looked out at the parking lot, stared at a car with an old decal from my old unit. I hadn't told anyone that decal was mine. Troy went on to say that Rex sat beside him for an hour without asking for anything. No food, no touch, just presence, quiet, steady, familiar. And when Troy had started to cry, the dog had leaned in and rested his head in his lap. "He didn't fix me," Troy wrote, "but he reminded me what it felt like to be seen." David read the letter twice, then 3 more times. He folded it and placed it in the breast pocket of his uniform. That evening, he stood beside a new helicopter, getting ready for another flight. His new crew was solid. The mission was standard, but there was something missing, and he knew exactly what it was. As the sun dipped behind the tarmac and the engine began to hum, David looked out toward the base gates, imagining Rex on the other side of the world, no longer chasing danger, but healing wounds that couldn't be seen. And in his heart, he knew Rex had never been just a dog. He had been a soldier, a guardian, a teacher, and now, a healer. His new mission was no less noble, no less dangerous in its own way, because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with bullets. They're fought in silence, behind closed doors, in the hearts of the broken. And Rex was still on the front lines, just a different kind.